Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, I'd like to talk about the historic events of the last few days, and that is the Security Conference in Munich and the days that would come down in history as the ones that shook the world. It's a political earthquake in Munich. And there are many comments and many explanations, and I'd like to put in my own in terms of trying to explain how to explain what happened. And I'd like to continue this inquiry along the five major lines of inquiry. Number one is the Putin and Trump, which is US Russia. Number two, Vance and the European leaders, which is the United States and Europe. Number three, Zelensky and the United States. Number four, Zelensky's and Europe. And number five is the response of the European leaders, and that is EU versus Russia and versus America. This is a lot to talk about, but so much happened of such enormous consequential follow-up that one has to try to find this explanation. So let me start with number one, which is Putin-Trump. The whole thing started this week with a telephone call by President Trump to President Putin, and it was a very long conversation, and the follow-up was more than anything anybody could expect, more than just agreement to start negotiations. It was an invitation of both leaders to each other to visit countries, and more importantly, Trump just thrust everybody into a shock by saying that Russia should be invited back into the G7. So what is going on now? Obviously, the Trump's political opponents would say that Trump has always been, a puppet of Putin, or that he's sellout of Atlanticist values, or that he's betraying NATO and American allies, and he's playing up to Putin, who will drink champagne and all this nonsense. Okay, let me try to explain President Trump's motivation. Now, number one, it's pivot to China. Relationship to the Europeans and to Russia from President Trump's perspective have to be understood as a pivot to China, meaning that the Chinese economy is the biggest challenge to the United States. The Pacific Ocean is of greater interest and importance economically, politically, militarily than the European continent. So the pivot to China explains the importance of relationship to Russia. Now, one interpretation is that Trump is trying to follow up on what was voiced by Ramaswamy during the election campaign, which is to bring Russia to the side of America in its competition rivalry of China. Including also India. So that could be seen as a major political cause and reason for this shift in U.S. interest in China, in Russia and India, to try to counterbalance the economic and political weight of China in this region. Number two is an important thing that Trump, back in 2016, I remember, said during the election campaign with his debate of Hillary Clinton, wouldn't that be nice to get along with Russia? He repeated that in the summer of 2024. Wouldn't that be nice to get along with Russia? Now, why is that? Why is his position that it would be nice to get along with Russia? That's very simple, because Russia is not a rival of the United States in terms of economic competition. European Union is, and China is, Russia is not. The only area where there is some kind of economic competition is in the area of energy, gas and oil. But in everything else, these economies do not in any way limit the other's capacity to fulfill the role that it wants. In other words, it is stupid, as Kissinger argued, to allow Russia and China to be militarily allied against the West, and specifically the United States, and that explains everything. So let me move on to the next line of inquiry, and that is Trump and Vance versus EU. Now, what has it been absolutely of historical significance and will come down in history as Vance's speech to the Munich Security Conference. Now, what most commentators focused on is that he upset the European leaders because he interfered in their political affairs and their domestic politics, and he accused them of not being democratic enough and so on. That this is not the most important. The most important is that there is a cultural shift and a cultural clash between Trump administration and Vance particularly, and the European Union. I have never seen any Europeans ever to pray publicly and to refer to God in any of their political speeches. Now, Vance did that, and he also cited cases that none of them in their commentaries refer to, and that is his examples of persecution of religious people for their prayer. And he also talked about the violations of Christian values and democratic values, accusing AfD, for example, in Germany of being neo-Nazi, which is totally ridiculous. It is not neo-Nazi. It simply is a country, is a party that follows Trump's agenda. And that agenda is a strong stance against illegal immigration, against the green energy policy, restoration of nuclear power stations, and restoration of normal relations with Russia, which is something that goes against the wishes of the current establishment in the European Union. So basically, what Vance has done is declared war, as this was perceived like this by the European Union, to the current globalist elite in the European Union that is running the show. In other words, politically, Vance has shown that Trump administration has no interest in supporting and treating as if nothing happened to the friends of Biden, to the friends of the globalists, to those who are in favor of open borders, who has a Asylrecht in German, which is a right for asylum for anybody, with open borders and the quotas imposed on other countries of Europe, how many they should admit, and so on and forth. This is a clash similar to the clash with the Democrats in the United States. So the European Union was totally in shock, and its leaders have been, first their reaction was a kind of a denial. They kept on saying, well, this is just cannot be. The only thing that they took away from it is that they should raise the level of their military expenditure. But it's not about military expenditure. It is really a secondary issue compared to that. It's a much, much more profound rift between the conservative and self-concentration of the United States on its own domestic issues and on anti-immigration, conservative reaction against woke culture. That is the root cause of the cultural and political confrontation with the current leadership of the European Union, and the support of those forces in Europe that are quite similar to Trump's agenda, such as Orban in Hungary and Alternative Germany in Germany, and even though she was not mentioned, Marine Le Pen in France. So that's the next. The next thing, of course, is the Europeans responded that they should build their European army, and this is, we will come back to this. This is, of course, a ridiculous non-starter, but I'll talk to this later. Now, let's move on to Trump and Zelensky, and Zelensky's speech in response to Vance. Now, the beginning of the story, of course, that Trump has made it very clear. No more loafers, no more unpaid support. So Zelensky's counting on the United States providing military assistance without anything just for the sake of fighting Russia is no longer going to be um, tolerated. They would have to pay for military assistance, and then when Zelensky refused to sign a deal where the minerals of Ukraine would be developed by the United States. This a few days ago during the visit of the finance um, Secretary of Finance to Ukraine. That basically put it over a collision course. And Vance's speech had made it worse, essentially by saying that Ukraine would have to pay for it or rely more on the Europeans. And this is after the speech already. Zelensky has announced that he would not accept anything that the United States and Russia would agree to. This is, in other words, a declaration of war between the two. In other words, the United States and Ukraine are now on non-speaking terms. Zelensky took a posture of being offended that he's not invited, that Putin was called first, that the Trump-Putin dialogue has begun without consulting him, so on and so forth. Now, his speech to the security um, conference in Munich is remarkable in a sense that he positions himself now with a standing ovation, that saying that Russia is going to invade Europe next and that they have to be together and give us more money and give us more weapons. And this is what he's been repeating for years, but now he has this new idea. If he cannot be admitted to NATO, he would create his own NATO, and that is the European army, where Ukraine has 1 million combat tested troops, and they would be at the centerpiece of the European army, which will confront the Russians. Now, that, of course, sounds absolutely ridiculous, but the Europeans loved it. They just gave him a standing ovation. Ukraine is a democracy who is going to fight Russia together with the Europeans. This is merely a soundbite, but in fact, what it shows basically is that Zelensky loved it. He absolutely loves the limelight. He's an actor. He loves to be the center of attention. You look at his eyes, as I did when he was speaking, they were burning with this applause and this ovation, and he's in the center of attention of the European leaders. This is absolutely wonderful, and that means that what he really does not care about is the fate of Ukraine. Now, let's face it, the facts are that the Russian army is advancing, that the Russians have claimed 4 provinces that are populated by the Russians, and the population that does not want to be in Ukraine. And that's a fact that Americans recognized. Now, Zelensky can have, if he wanted to, a deal, cut his losses, preserve the independence of the rest of Ukraine, and survive as an independent country that has neutrality, and then he could develop whatever warm relations he wants with the rest of Europe. Instead, what he says, that he wants to fight, continue to fight, and counts on European help. He's rejecting any deal with Putin because supposedly Putin doesn't want it. In fact, he doesn't want it because he doesn't want to face elections. He doesn't want to lose power. He would rather have Ukraine ruined, occupied by Russia, than agree to a deal which is possible. In other words, Zelensky actually is the best friend of those in Russia who want to continue the war until victorious end in Kiev. His refusal to negotiate, to accept any deal that would be that actually hurts the interest of Ukraine and would cost it perhaps even its very survival. But then, of course, Zelensky chose to be in the limelight and to have an ovation, standing ovation of the European generals, rather than agree and have his country with losses but survival. So this is about the Ukraine, Europe, and Ukraine, United States. And the last segment in this discussion is EU and Russia. Now, this all came out at the Security Conference in Munich, and the reaction to the speeches of Zelensky and of Vice President Vance. What is absolutely shocking for the Russian audience and to some of us on this side of the ocean is that Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany, Ms. Baerbock, said, and I quote, "Putin's Russia is the enemy." Now, this is very. Why is that? Is she said so? Why is it an enemy? It's an enemy because a sovereign country, in her words, of Ukraine, was attacked. This is a Russian aggression. Now, I want to remind Ms. Baerbock that she has no moral right to speak about Russian aggression because it is Germany that twice in 20th century occupied Russia and the entire Ukraine, and they knew that at that time it was a part of Russia and it was a part of the Soviet Union, and it was Hitler who stood in 1943 at the gates of Kharkov planning the Kursk offensive, exactly as Zelensky is doing it now, in order to render Russia a final and strategic defeat. And after all of that, after hundreds of thousands of civilians killed by the Germans in World War II in Ukraine and in Russia, she has the arrogance to call Russia an aggressor. This is absolutely ridiculous because, Ms. Baerbock, I want to remind you, for the last 400 years, Ukraine was a part of Russia, and it is only for the last 30 years it is independent, and it could have stayed independent if it didn't want to join NATO. And it is the Ukrainians' choice that was going to be the result of their destruction of the Kiev regime. Now, let's get back to the Europeans. They are in denial. They keep on saying that Ukraine will be a member of NATO, even though that's impossible because every member of NATO has a right to block the entrance of any new member. If the United States said no place in NATO for Ukraine, that is the final word. No, they keep on saying it. And a new idea of Macron is that now they're going to have a European Union army. Okay, fine. Maybe they will, maybe they will not. But the point is, this is a historical break. And that is a historical break between the United States and the European Union that may lead to a total rearrangement of the political and military structures in Europe in the months and years to come. So, this is what I'm ending with, and I hope you will subscribe to this channel and continue these reviews of current politics, Dr. Brovkin, issues of contemporary politics with me. And please subscribe and buy my book, From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, and listen to my other playlists, War in Ukraine, Soviet politics, post-Soviet history, European history, and so on. And on that, I will say goodbye.